Hello again, book lovers. It's Carlo Rovelli this time with two books, both slim volumes, popularising science or aspects of it. The first one is a biography of Anaximander, and the second is called The Order of Time. Before we begin, let me read to you the entirety of Anaximander's known output, so settle down. All things originate from one another and vanish into one another according to necessity. They give to each other justice and recompense for injustice in conformity with the order of time. So the first thing to say is bravo for getting not one but two books out of this single quote. Of course, there's more to it than that. We know about Anaximander's theories from other writers writing about him, critiquing him. Mr. Rovelli in this book makes the case for putting him on a pedestal that we've kind of not put him on before. Because what did he do? This particular Greek philosopher, he proposed that rather than the earth being a thing we were on and the heavens something above it, that in fact the earth was more like a ball floating in space. How about that for a revolutionary idea? And the thing is, from our point of view, it isn't very revolutionary because we kind of knew that. But of course back then, and we're talking 600 before Christ, it was revolutionary. And by the way, the idea of calling a revolution possibly comes from Copernicus's revolutionary book on the revolution of the planets. And that's something I learned from this little volume. So it's nicely written, nice little tidbits of information in it. And in the end, it's quite philosophically deep. Because not only did Anaximander propose that the earth was a floating ball, but he was the first one that we know of to attribute non-divine reasons for things happening, like tornadoes, floods, storms. They were not simply explained away by gods, and this was his massive contribution. It's a small book, 180 pages of text, small pages, and it takes us on a nice journey from the 6th century BC through Anaximander to a consideration of what natural laws actually are. In chapter 8 there's a quick run through in what is science of the successive paths that science has taken and the successive revolutions. That, by the way, is, if you want a longer history of that fantastic episode in human thought, I recommend Arthur Koestler's The Sleepwalkers, which will give you an expanded and fascinating version of that. And chapter 9 talks about cultural relativism, come back to that. 10 is called Can We Understand the World Without Gods? And 11, Pre-Scientific Thought, also very interesting. Let's go back to 9 though, a little pet thing of mine. Relativism. Okay, it's all relative, isn't it? How very modern to say that. How very scientific, in fact, as we'll get on to. Unfortunately, and I'm quoting from Mr. Rovelli here, unfortunately, however, this sane recognition of the relative nature of systems of value and the contingency of judgments is often taken one step further, to complete relativization of all values. Namely to the conclusion that all opinions about truth and falsehood are equally valid, or that all ethical and moral judgments must be considered equivalent. This radical version of cultural relativism is, unfortunately, becoming fashionable among the larger public. Wait a minute. Becoming fashionable, he said, in the year 2009. Well, let's say it has become fashionable among the larger public. And the quote ends with, I believe that it was born of a deep misunderstanding. So do I, Carlo, so do I. And he continues on the facing page. The point is that we're always immersed in a given culture, and it's impossible to step outside. The notion of truth does not exist outside of our universe of discourse, and precisely for this reason we cannot do without the notion of truth. Even if we seek to deny it, we speak always in terms of this notion. It's only from within our domain of discourse, etc. So there you go, that's the kind of highfalutin language he's going to use and the kind of philosophy he's going to go into in the slim and recommendable volume called Anaximander and the Nature of Science. And if you remember, the original quote ended with Anaxi saying, all things give to each other justice and recompense for injustice in conformity with the order of time. And that is the title of the second of these slim volumes. Now, I didn't know Carlo Rovelli before. He's a science popularizer, found on the New York Times bestsellers list, etc. And yeah, I enjoy these books. This one, explaining time from the point of view of a physicist, a scientist, was a lot more digestible to my brain than A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, which I did read rather than pretend to read, but yes, that had me a little bit perplexed. While we're on the subject of pop science, I think James Gleick's book on chaos is a damn good read, and yes, gives you a nice insight into a new domain of knowledge. So what do we get in the order of time? Well, again, it's slightly under 200 pages, same size, small, same size pages, small, and he tries to explain what time is. And it's not what you think. First of all, there isn't a present. There's no universal present in the universe, just as there's no centre to the universe. And that's kind of where we start. Loss of unity, loss of direction. Here he is in part one, undermining the foundations of what we think we know about time. There are some small diagrams. There are explanations of how the passage of time seems to be quicker or slower depending on where you are in the universe, and it is a bit hard to get a handle on that, I have to say. You have to imagine we're talking about light years, massive numbers, massive distances. I suppose in my head I could sort of think of it like this. Before the arrival of the steam train, London and Bristol used different times. 3 o'clock wasn't the same in both cities until the arrival of a transport fast enough for it to be important to synchronise watches. That, in a tiny little microcosm, is how I see this question of relativity. So the book takes us step by step through what modern physicists think of time. I have to admit the concept of entropy is one that just doesn't fit in my head for some reason. It seems to be a positive name for a sort of tailing off into nothingness. Anyway, it does involve all that. I can't pretend that I could now operate a particle physics laboratory with a great deal of confidence. Surprising to know that time doesn't figure in physical and quantum physical formulae, except for one crucial one, which is explained in the book, and I think that's a nice little taster.